Hello readers, I'm Amy and I'm your nonfiction feminist. Today I'm talking about Women Talking by Miriam Toews. This is based on a true story and it's women talking. There's really not much more to say than that as far as what goes on in this book. It is not filled with adventure. There's not really a lot of action going on in this book. So typically it's not a book that I would think that I would like because it's so full of dialogue. However, Toews did a really good job with my individual reviews. As usual, if you are used to watching my reviews, you know that I discuss premise, plot, world building, and character. To go ahead and get us started with the premise, I will actually read the note on the novel so you have an idea of the basis for this book. Between 2005 and 2009, in a remote Mennonite colony in Bolivia named the Manitoba Colony, after the province in Canada, many girls and women would wake in the morning feeling drowsy and in pain, their bodies bruised and bleeding, having been attacked in the night. The attacks were attributed to ghosts and demons. Some members of the community felt the women were being made to suffer by God or Satan as punishment for their sins. Many accused the women of lying for attention or to cover up adultery. Still others believed everything was the result of wild female imagination. Eventually, it was revealed that 8 men from the colony had been using an animal aesthetic to knock their victims unconscious and rape them. In 2011, these men were convicted in a Bolivian court and received lengthy prison sentences. In 2013, while the convicted men were still in jail, it was reported that similar assaults and other sexual abuses were continuing to take place in the colony. Women Talking is both a reaction through fiction to these true-life events and an act of female imagination. That is essentially the premise for Women Talking. It's about women in a Mennonite colony. This discussion takes place through 3 generations of women, ages from about 3 to, I'd say, 50 or 60, maybe a little bit older. You have an older woman from each family, I believe 2 daughters of each of the women. One of them might actually be like a stepdaughter or a niece, and 2 youth about the age of 12. There is a 3-year-old who comes up in this later. She's one of the toughest. She provides one of the toughest parts to read about. So trigger warning for rape, specifically rape of a minor, a couple of minors. The tough spot, I'm going to go ahead and tell you this now so you're prepared. The hardest part to read is when the 3-year-old enters the room where the meeting is taking place, and you learn that she has been out of diapers for 1 year and due to this event has gotten back into diapers and is currently dealing with a sexually transmitted infection. It's tough. It's hard to imagine. That's about how the description goes, so it's nothing super graphic. This book doesn't get graphic, but it's just the idea of the events that took place that can be really tough to deal with. That is about it for the premise. The plot, there are some men left over in the colony who go into town to work on making bail to get the men out. So this book takes place over, I believe, about 2 days. These 2 generations of women are discussing their options and trying to come to a decision before the men who were in jail return on bail. Their options come down to staying or leaving. And there's a lot of stuff that they have to discuss in those 2 options. They talk about forgiveness, they talk about the peacefulness of their religion and their way of life. They talk about their dependence on the men for things and the women's role in the colony. So that's a really fascinating thing about this particular discussion happening in this particular group. There's a real breakdown in this book of patriarchy and women's roles in the colony, and it's really awesome to see that discussion because the idea of a Mennonite colony is that they're very religious, very set in their ways. You wouldn't think that women would really stand up for themselves in this kind of situation. So to see them attempting to do that and discussing things on their own terms without male input or without the larger population of male input is really awesome. This story is actually told from the perspective of a male, which I will get to when I discuss character. Next up, we have world building, and world building takes place mostly through discussion, since this book is mainly discussion, but you get a real sense of where they're at. So you're seeing them in the colony where they live, and they're meeting with each other. So they're meeting in a hayloft in a barn. It's really secret, like they invited some women to this meeting. These people are the only ones who showed up. There are 8 women taking part in this discussion, and 1 man who is writing down the discussion. This story is told from the perspective of a male. Whenever he was a child, his parents removed him and the family from the colony to go pursue another way of life, and as an adult he has decided to rejoin the colony. Due to his life outside the colony and for reasons of his way of life or whatever, he is seen as effeminate. He is a lesser man. Even the women see him as lesser. So because he is lesser, he's more on the women's level rather than the men's level. And he also is able to write. He is a literate person, whereas the women in the Mennonite colony are illiterate. So it's told from the male perspective because he has been the one chosen to take minutes of the meeting so that they can kind of figure out how they're going to come to their decision. So you get a real sense of who is in power in the Mennonite colony. Clearly, it's the men. It's a very religiously based group, very patriarchally based, so men are in charge. These women aren't really supposed to be meeting, which is why the meeting is secret. You get the sense of urgency to come to this decision, and it's just really awesome to see them breaking things down on their own. They have a discuss of whether people are animals, whether women specifically are animals, how animals are treated versus how women and people are treated, whether they should be treated the same or differently. They have a discussion of their peaceful way of life, their ways of looking at religion and God, and the world building for this was really, really well done. As for the characters, like I said, there are 8. I went through a lot of this already. They're discussing their husbands and their brothers and their uncles and other personal family members of theirs who took part in this crime. Through these discussions, you also get a real sense of how the female characters relate to one another. You have the 2 younger girls who are basically just acting like the kids that they are and don't have a lot to do with the conversation, even though they are present, because they just want to be girls, and they weren't conscious for the whole thing. They don't really think like adults yet. They don't have a reason to think like adults. You have the younger women who are trying to step in and make decisions, and you have the older women who are maybe being more traditional. So characterization also really, really well done. I would like to have a discussion on the way they come to their decision. So some really big things to think about with the Mennonite colony, or one of the biggest things, is their peaceful way of life. So you have these men who did this really terrible thing to them, and they have a time limit as to how quickly they can come to the decision of whether they are staying or leaving. And something that comes up in this book is that when one of the women looks at her husband who took part in these events, she gets really angry. She actually feels murderous. Whenever she sees her husband, she feels like she could kill him. That is a really tough emotion to deal with in general, particularly for these women who are used to living a very peaceful way of life. There is not a lot of violence, theoretically, that has a place in Mennonite colonies. So one of the things that they have to discuss is, how do we forgive the men when we have these violent feelings towards them? Perhaps we should remove ourselves from the situation so we have time and space to work on forgiveness, and so we don't feel these murderous feelings towards our husbands. But also, there's the fact that in staying, they'd be fulfilling their womanly duty and taking care of the men and cooking the meals and raising the children as they have been taught to do. So, if they decide to leave, then there was a lot of really big things that they have to discuss in that, particularly their forgiveness and their ways of peace. If they decide to stay, you can't really fault them for that, because it's very ingrained in them that they are the caretakers. They take care of the men. They have a very important role in this way of life, and they're not sure that the men can really make their way through life without them. Overall, this book was completely amazing. Definitely 5 stars for me. Like I said, it's not a book that I would typically enjoy, being very, very dialogue heavy and not having a very moving plot. But this was really well done, very engaging, really quick read. Please pick this up if you have any interest in feminist discussion, in patriarchy, in small cultures. I absolutely loved this book. If you enjoy this video and bookish content, please like, subscribe, and be my friend. Right now I am putting up videos about twice a week. I might do a little more towards the end of this month because we have the reading rush coming up. So I will see you all around. Have an awesome day. Bye.